Hello and a very good day. Today I'm going to explain a tutorial on how to build a basic web application on web server, MySQL server, and in this case we are using MariaDB, and Firewall server using 3 CentOS 7 architecture. And that's about the topic, okay? And then we have the layout of this topology that we are using. You can see here we have public and private network. So in the public we have one host, Windows 10, which is this machine host machine, and in the middle we have one firewall server which separate public and private network. And there's a reason why I put router here, and I will explain that later. Now here we have a web server using CentOS 7 and database using CentOS 7. So these three are virtual machines. Well, this one is the host machine. So why I call this one as a router, because every time the host PC needs to access web server, it needs to go pass through this firewall server or router, as I call. Same goes when web server wanted to go to host PC, it still needs to get passed through this firewall first. So this firewall manages the traffic between public and private. If the firewall stop or disallow any private and any traffic from public, any host from public cannot go into private. Same goes if the firewall stop any traffic from private, any host from private cannot go to public network. And that's why I call it as a firewall router. So the goal of this project is to create a web page. The goal of this project to create 3 CentOS 7 architecture. As you can see, we have 3 and one host, as you can see here. And then the next goal is to create a web application on the web server. In this web server, we will going to have one page. A web page consists of HTML and PHP, and in this database we're going to have stored data which will be used by the PHP in the web server. And we need to make sure that this host PC can access this web server to get the web page, and basically can run it here on the host PC browser. So that's what the goal of this project. And it's going to be a little bit tricky, but we're going to go through part by part. So the first part is to create a firewall router between public and private network. So here we have our VirtualBox manager. We have 3 VM, web server, firewall server, and database. And for the settings, the only important things that we need to make sure is the network. We're going to use bridge adapter for the rest of this project, and the others you can configure as your needs. And then the firewall, for the firewall we're going to have 2 different adapters, 1 and 2. Why we need 2 different network interface? Because we have 2 different networks. One will be sit at this node and the other one will be sitting at this node. One will be pointing at the public network, while this one will be pointing at the private network. That's why we're going to have 2 network adapters. Understood? Now let's go to the firewall. First of all, we need to check our network. We can do IP config and fconfig. So here we have 2 network interfaces. This is the first one, this is the second one. And the first one will be used here. For public, it will sit here at this node, and the second one will be sitting at this node with the private. That's why we have two. And I already configured this IP address. I will explain how to configure. And here you can see we have 192.168.110. So why I use this IP address? It is because when I run cmd and I press IP config, I could see that our public network is using 192.168.1.3. So here the IP is 192.168.1.3. So that's why our network interface here needs to be the same subnet with this one, and I use 192.168.10. see, and that's why. And then for this one we have 192.168.10.1. Can you see the difference between the subnet? This is the difference that differentiate between the open network and the private network, and it is very important since since both networks cannot have the same subnet. So that's why we have different IP for those two network interfaces. So how to configure these network interfaces? What you can do is we can type in etc sysconfig network script ICIFCFG dash. And here some of you might not found ENP, but you guys found ETH. ETH, I think? Yes, ETH. It is the same thing. It's just in CentOS 7 they start using, in the latest update they start using ENP instead of ETH. So just stick with your configuration. If your network interfaces is ETH, then use ETH. If it ENP, then just use ENP. So now what we're going to configure is our public network. So it's going to be the first interface, ENP 0S3. And as you can see here, we have multiple configuration, but the only thing that you need to focus on is these these 5 lines here. Boot proto, usually on default CentOS will use DHCP, but in this project we're going to use static IP. Why? Because we only have 4 hosts that needs to be configured, so by using static IP it will be much easier to monitor. And then the IP address, this is where we put the IP address, the broadcast, net mask, and network. So network, you can see the subnet, and here 0, which pointing out to the start point of the network. And then the next thing that we need to focus is on boot. We need to change it to yes, so that every time you reboot it will stay with this configuration. And then here you can see the name and device, and then you have the UID here. So that's it for our first interface. Now we can go back, and then we can check our private network interface. Okay, here at some point when you open this file for the second interface, network interface, some of you might found an empty file. Nothing, no configuration at all. The reason is I have been facing that quite a lot. I don't see I think CentOS does not generate the file for the second network interface, so we can easily create it by ourselves. if you found an empty file for the second interface, what you need to do is just go back to the first interface, copy all, and paste it inside the second network interface. That's it. As easy as that. The only thing that you need to make sure is, just like I said, these 5 lines, and here we change the IP address, the subnet 10 to 10.1, and then here, if you copy the previous network interface, you need to have different UID. But how can I find my UID for ENP0S8? Since in ifconfig we don't see any here, in this econfig we can't see any UID inside here. So what we can do is you can run UID and it will create new UID for ENPS8. When you press enter, it will show you a new UID for that you can use for ENP0S8, and you can paste it back inside this configuration file. That's it. Now we already configured network interfaces for open network and private network. Good. So now what we need to do is we need to configure our firewall for this firewall server or router. And in CentOS we have 2 different ways. We have IP tables and we have firewall. IP tables is the older firewall method, while firewall D is the latest method that CentOS are using. So you can choose one, but in this project we will be using firewall D. So for firewall D, first of all we need to check our network script. So D, just like this, you can see that we have 2 different network interfaces like we configured previously. And now what we need to do is we need to type systemctl. We going to mask IP tables since we are using firewall D, and IP6 tables and EB tables, and you press enter. So it will create these 3 lines, and then you're done. So what's next? We need to configure our firewall. So in firewall, first thing first, you run this line, get active zones. And here, firewall D, we have multiple of zones that we can use. And on the screen, you can see that we have public interfaces, which contains our 2 network interface, public and P0S8 and P0S3. So what can we do with these zones? So imagine in this firewall router we divide it by 2. We divide it by 2. On this part we have a zone called DMZ, and on this part we have a zone called public. See, in this one router we can separate it into 2 parts, DMZ and public, and that's the purpose of zones. So now since this is the public network interface and this is the private network interface, I need to separate these 2 first. So what I can do is I can do firewall cmd remove interface s3 from zone public. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign enp0s3 to a zone called DMZ. So firewall cmd add interface equal enp, oh sorry, here I missed a dash, enp 0s8 0s3, sorry, to what zone? The zone called DMZ. Press enter. Success. So what we can do now is we can I'm sorry, this one I think the best way is to put a permanent so that it will not change during reboot. Another dash like this, yes. Okay, good. So what we can do, we need to reload our firewall. So firewall cmd reload, and it's a success. So what we can do, we can see our table, get active zones, and here we can see we have two different zones, DMZ and public. So the open network will be using DMZ and the private network will be using public. I know it's confusing, but you can choose any zones you have, but this is the private network. You can change it to another zone if you're not comfortable by using public, or you can change it to any zones like private. You can do that, alright? Now we're going to continue with some criteria that we need to check. Since this whole project is based on a web application, which means we are going to have an output in terms of a web page, we need to make sure that these two are allowed to use HTTP or HTTPS. And how to check using firewall is firewall cmd, you can type list services, and let's say we check for zone DMZ. As you can see, zone DMZ is currently allowing SSH, HTTPS and HTTP. So we have these two in zone DMZ. And how about zone public? Zone public contains 4 starting from the HTTP v6 client, and it can be different between two zones. And the more you know about zones, the more you understand about zones, you have unlimited way that you can use in order to exploit those zones. You can do multiple things, and yeah, you should try go through zones, firewall zones at some point. And if let's say you don't have HTTP or HTTPS in your service, just like on the screen we have both, but you don't have on your computer, what you can do is you can add it through firewall. and then you can type permanent so that it will stay permanent zone, let's say DMZ. So what kind of service I want to add? Okay, I want to add an FTP, file transfer protocol service, which allow file transfer between two hosts. So what I can do is I can type add service equal bracket FTP, and if you need to add more, you can just press comma and then add, like LDP, for example. So press enter. We need to make sure envelope service FTP not among existing services. Permanent add service. What else do we have? Let's say NTP. Can we use NTP? NTP not among existing services. How about LDP? Services. I'm not sure why we cannot add FTP, NTP, or LDAP for our project, but either way, this is the way how you add service into your zones. And if you don't have HTTP and HTTPS, then you can try with this line of command, and it's working. You can try. So now we already have HTTP and HTTPS in both. So now what we need to do is, let's go back here. All hosts in this one network or in each network are using IPv4. So whenever a host PC is sending a packet to web server, we need to have packet forwarding method. So to add packet forwarding, what we can do is we can type vim etc sysctl dot e ip_forward dot conf etc syscontrol.d ipforward.conf, and inside here put this one line of code net.ipv4.ip_forward equal 1, and then just write and quit, and that's it. And then go to sysctl -w net.ipv4.ip_forward equal 1. Then press enter. You will see this code, this line of command, which means it's working. And then we have done our packet forwarding method. We have included inside this firewall server. Before we continue with another important thing for firewall here, we need to go back. We need to go to our web server. We need to go here. Since this web server also connected with the firewall router, we need to configure this web server. And yes, we need to configure And here you can see that we have one network interface, ENP0S3, and since you see this IP is DHCP, you can see that it's not using our static IP. So how to change that? So let's go to pin etc sys config network script network dash leads ifcfg dash enp0s3. So you can see here we have a fresh configuration. So what we need to do, we need to change this boot proto. Let's change it to static. Since we are using static, we need to create an IPEDR equal. So since this web server is inside this private, remember our second network interface in the router? We are using 192.168.10.1, correct? If you check back here, you can see. So what we do, we can type 192.168.10.10, and then we can set broadcast equal 192.168.10.255, sorry. And then we have the net mask equal 255.255.255.0, and also we have the network. For the network, it depends on our network for private network. This is 192.168.10.0, and that's it. Yes. And the last one is make sure this on boot is changed to yes. Now we already configured, so we can write and quit. If we need systemctl restart network, we need to make sure that what we change in here is reloaded for the network. If we see again, if config, you can see that our ID has changed, 192.168.10.10, and since we already configured this firewall and we already configured the network interface for private network, can we ping it? So let's try ping -c5 192.168.10.1. See, we can ping the firewall network private network interface. Okay, good. So now we already configured our web server. Alright, so we just configured our web server with static IP address that we can use, and now, just like I said, we have one more important things that we need to do inside our firewall server, and that is port forwarding. To be honest, port forwarding is quite hard to explain theoretically, but what I can summarize is, for example, in this project we want to HTTP web server. So a host PC cannot directly go to web server. That's a fact, there's no other way, correct? So the only nearest point that host PC can go is firewall router through the network interface ENP0S3, correct? So what if I put 192.10? So if you remember, this is our first network IP address, correct? And what we can understand from this page is this host can access port 80 on firewall router, but host PC cannot access port 80 on web server or database, because firewall is the nearest point that host PC can access. So that's how port forwarding get into action. Web server also have its own port 80. So we need to configure firewall so that whenever host PC connect to firewall port 80, it redirect to web server port 80, which means host PC will use firewall IP address to open web server port 80. Okay, so what we can do now is we need to add a port forwarding script in our firewall server. So how to add port forwarding? So we can type firewall cmd zone DMZ, and then add forward port equal port 80, since we are using port 80, and then proto equals TCP, then proto again, and then to port equals 80, and finally to address equals 192.168.10.10. So what this line do is we're going to forward a port, but what port? Port 80. Port 80 where? Port 80 in our firewall routing. To port 80 to address 192.168.10 and 10. This part means that port 80 in a web server with IP address 192.168.10.10. So this is the Apache welcome page for firewall router, and I have done a little bit of tweak in web server Apache in this server. So we're going to see any difference if this line working. So press enter, and then what we need to do is we need to firewall cmd and reload. Good, now success. So let's see if we have any change in this page. See, now we have a different welcome page because I changed a little bit in the web server in USR share httpd cd no index ls in the HTML. So I'm going to open it. as you can see here, I changed the header to this one here. And what else I changed? Arrive at remote web server. I think it's up there. Yeah, here. Title arrive at remote web server. And this proves that even we are using IP address of firewall router, as we can see here, we managed to access port for web server by using the port forwarding command that we just tried. So yeah, so we just managed to complete a firewall router that we can allow connection and disallow any connection. For example, if we don't want port forwarding, means if let's say we want to stop any incoming traffic from external or from public address network, we can just put remove and then firewall reload. Success. So when we refresh, it will arrive at firewall Apache, firewall HTTP. So we just finished our firewall router